So let's call. This is the Special Regional Housing Mandate Committee meeting of Thursday, January 31st. And would staff call the roll, please?
Berman.
Here.
Holman.
Here.
Sharp.
Here.
Schmidt.
Here.
4 present.
Thank you. And this is the time on the agenda when anyone who would like to speak to something that is not on the agenda may do so. And we have no cards. So we will go to action item number 1, the approval of an adopted regional housing needs allocation for 2014-2022 housing element cycle. And would staff care to make a presentation?
Yes, thank you, Chair Holman. Curtis Williams, Director of Planning and Community Environment, and we are here with a recommendation to you for you to recommend to the City Council adoption of the city's official appeal letter to ABAG regarding the regional housing needs allocation. At your last meeting, we talked about this issue, and your direction to us was, first of all, to focus the appeal on the issue of the balance between the county numbers and the city's numbers, with a particular focus on the couple of Stanford general use permit sites that are proximate to our University Avenue train station, and that maybe those could be transferred into the county's regional allocation rather than counting it as ours, although those don't specifically count as ours. But county has very low numbers, and so it seemed like it was not accurate. So that was would be the focus of our appeal. That seems to be consistent with the language of the appeal. Am I not picking up?
Oh, sorry.
Share with Mark here, I guess. Okay, that better? All right. So that seems to be consistent with the direction of the statute in terms of what we can appeal and what elements we can appeal and what we can't. But then the committee also was concerned that we not lose sight of the issues that the council has raised previously regarding the longer-term projections, the alternative ways to reduce greenhouse gases besides the jobs housing connection, and I think there was one other item in there, but we didn't want to lose sight of those. So what we've done is we've prepared a cover letter to ABAG that outlines all of the issues, but then the appeal template that ABAG has for the specific appeal is focused on the county issue and the 350 units and the general use permit. And so we have attached to the staff report both of those. The cover letter is attachment A, or 1A, and then 1B is the template format that ABAG will use. Now, ABAG will take this and they will analyze it as a staff, and they will send it on to the committee of the ABAG group that will review and recommend to the full board ultimately the adoption of the final numbers that will go out to all the cities and counties. And I believe Mayor Scharf is participating on the committee.
Yes, I'm an ABAG
right?
judge.
Yes, he's a judge. He will not be able to rule on our appeal, but we're a hat and a mustache that day.
Yeah. False nose.
Yeah. So we're looking for your recommendation to move this forward to council. We have a deadline of February 18th to get the response to ABAG. Council doesn't have a meeting on the 18th. Your last meeting before that is the 11th, so this is scheduled for the 11th. If there's a unanimous vote of the committee, it would be on as a consent item. If not, it will be on as an action item. And then I wanted to report one other update point. Aaron Ackman and Stephen Turner and I went a couple days ago to the county and met with county planning staff and talked about this issue of the allocation with the hopes that, and it's always been a hope, that we could cooperatively work together to fashion something so that the appeal isn't actually necessary to get those units transferred. And we had a good meeting with the county. They are, and Stanford was there as well, Stanford representatives as well, and they've been meeting with Stanford representatives. So they had two particular concerns. Apart from a mechanical one, they weren't sure that we could do what we're talking about doing, which is at this late date be able to transfer between jurisdictions. And that is not an issue. But in any event, their two main concerns were, one was that they believe that if we transferred 350 units, we had to then break those down by the income categories. The ABAG numbers are, those 350 are divided up so that like 75 are very low income, 95 are low income, and there's moderate income and high or above moderate income level. So there's 4 income groupings of housing that all the distributions to every city are broken into. And their concern was that they would take on then the low income and very low income percentage of that, and that the general use permit for the county for Stanford actually does not break down the units in that way, but does require that Stanford contribute certain dollars to a housing fund for low and very low income housing, and that's generated a fair amount of money. There's currently, I think, $5 million in that fund, but they've probably spent $15 million. It's deposited as they build out new campus buildings, and that money has been distributed not in the county. It's been distributed to Palo. Since most of our housing projects here have gotten money from that source. So their argument was they're actually providing for the low and very low income, and Stanford's GUP doesn't have that restriction. So we say, well, what if you took on 350 units or something like that, but it was all moderate and above moderate, and what we have a lot of trouble with is the moderate category, so maybe that's good that it be broken down that way. So they seem much more amenable to that possibility. They again thought that that wasn't legal, that that the law requires that if you transfer from one agency to another, you have to do it at the same proportion of the income things, and we said, I don't think so, as long as Palo Alto is not giving you more low and very low income than our percentage, that we thought that was okay. So Aaron contacted ABAG yesterday and confirmed that our reading on both of those issues was correct, and we're putting the county in touch with that person from ABAG so they can understand that that is an option. So we'd like to proceed to try to work with them. We surely don't have time to effectuate any kind of agreement formally before February 11th, so I think we need to go ahead with the appeal as it stands, and I'll let the staff know that. But I also think that it would be useful to have either the mayor or chair or someone from this committee, or maybe more than one, contact County Supervisor Simidian's office. We've kept them kind of out of the loop at this point, but I think it would be helpful now to, number one, let them know, number two, have them be able to let their county staff know that they know, and that they're hoping that we can hopefully resolve this outside the parameters of the appeal process. So that was somewhat encouraging. They're definitely very reluctant to do that. They're enjoying having 77 units as their allocation after they had 1,100 last time around, and they've told their board that this reduction has happened, and that there's been a real shift in focus, that the county's got much less housing obligation this time around because of them generally don't have the planned development, priority development areas and that. But they did seem to be open, as I said, to some modification here if that was a viable way to go. Stanford seemed to think that was okay too. That didn't affect their approvals that they have for the general use permit. So we'd like to proceed that way, and we can try to arrange something as far as supervisor's office goes, if that's the way the group would like to go. But at this point, again, we do want to get this letter and template formalized and to the council so we can move it forward to ABAG before the 18th. Thank you.
Thank you, Curtis. And we do have new people around the table today. So I want to recognize and welcome Councilmember Berman, Board Member Mitchell, and Commissioner Keller, who have not been here before. So I actually want to apologies.
Yeah, Keller has been here.
I have been here before.
You have been here before,
2
but
meetings ago, but I'm not the official member, I'm still an alternate.
right, because Mark was, yeah. So I didn't know if now you were the permanent one.
No.
So, okay. So perhaps I would look to especially Councilmember Berman and Board Member Mitchell and see if you have any questions, such that you have any clarification that you might need, or a little bit of bringing up to speed that you might need since you're new to this task.
I do. Is this kind of diving in, or more kind of big picture questions first?
Well, if you need a big picture question, hopefully you've had a chance to ahead of time get some kind of knowledge base on this. But if you have a big picture question that you want to ask pertinent to this,
Sure, and if it's kind of out of order and would be fit better in a different part of the meeting, let me know. But I mean, my big picture question just has to do with the appeal letter and why we're still kind of appealing on 4 different grounds when 3 of them seem to have been dismissed, and there seems to be a good opportunity to succeed on one. But we're tacking these other ones on, and I can get more into my thoughts on that at a later time if that makes sense. But that's kind of just wondering what that rationale was for appealing on all 4 points.
you want to respond to that, Curtis?
Yes, I will, though it was the committee's direction last time to do this, but I think it's appropriate. We're not appealing on the 4. The appeal to ABAG ultimately is this template, which is the one, the 1B, which is the Stanford issue.
Yeah.
The cover letter covers the other issues, and I think the concern of the committee was we didn't want to lose sight of that, if there was any sort of legal rights that were, being abrogated because we weren't discussing this, so later on we couldn't come back and discuss this again in the future.
Okay.
We wanted to be sure that we at least touched on these and covered them and let them know those are still of concern. But I think all they probably will provide to the ABAG review committee is this template format.
Okay.
And that's the focus of the appeal.
I have some more thoughts, but that at least answers that question for now.
Okay, and Board Member Mitchell, do you have any?
First of all, thank you for the welcome. Thank you, everyone. I'm here really with my ears pinned on. I think my question in reading over the packet had to do with Stanford's disposition on the appeal, and I think Curtis just touched on that. So I'll look forward to hearing your comments about the letter recommended.
Okay, so given that, Councilmember colleagues, other questions or comments?
Yeah, I suppose.
Okay.
I mean, I'd just like to chat a little bit more or get a better understanding. I guess so I was coming at this new. I'm new to the council and I hadn't been a part of this, and so I was reading through the packet and read the initial letter that we sent, read ABAG's reply and I was kind of having flashbacks to our Monday council meeting with the DAS system, and how, we had the DAS system, and we couldn't take into account environmental impacts, we couldn't take into account any health impacts. I mean, those are the things that people just can't appeal on, or they can appeal on it, but
Yeah.
law says that we can't take that under consideration. And any time that anybody brought those up, I initially tuned out because I know that that's not something that we can have any say on, and I feel like we're doing that here because, and I understand why we did it the first time, and it always makes sense to give it a go, But I worry that I see this issue of not wanting to drop it just in case, so we can bring it up later on. I don't know if that's warranted or if that's just a concern that we have, but I worry that we're diluting what we're really trying to get at when we have parts of this that say the city encourages ABAG to regain public confidence of its numbers by working with HCD. If I'm ABAG, I don't really take kindly to that. And if we're asking ABAG to approve an appeal, we're kind of asking them to I don't want to call it a favor, but we're asking them to see kindly upon what we're asking. I don't know that language helps our cause. And so I don't know if there's been more discussion about that in previous meetings that I wasn't a part of. But if I were ABAG, I'd read that and, not be inclined to react favorably.
And of course, you are welcome to make alternative language if you choose. I'm not going to speak a whole lot today for obvious reasons. No, it's okay. It's okay. But your point is exactly right, that we don't want to. We want to keep these out there and in front of us because we have for a very, very long time found that ABAG's scenario is pretty flawed at a base level. And I think with that, I'll let Councilmember, or actually Mayor Scharf speak to you. Had your hand up to address that.
I did. I actually agree with Mark. The more I've thought about this, and when I read this, I might be okay with keeping number one in as long as we end it. And, we haven't gone to the public yet, so I don't make any motions. But, I think we should definitely take out the part about regaining public confidence of its numbers. I'd probably be fine with saying something like projections on a periodic basis. The city encourages ABAG to work with HCD to reduce the 2010-2040 projections to reflect, and then just end it there. I think we've made our point. I don't think we need to go on to that whole second paragraph. I think all cities, not all cities, but at least Mountain View, Menlo Park, Sunnyvale, they're as built out as we are. And we sound whiny when we sit here and say we're a built out city. And so is everyone else. And I think that just hurts ours. So I would do away with paragraph 2. And I haven't really decided. I think we need to have some discussion about paragraph 3. I'm not so sure that this letter won't go to the committee. I'm not so sure this won't go to the board. I don't see any value in arguing your case to annoy people, frankly, and I think that we should focus on our appeal and what we can win and put our best foot forward on that. And I don't think by writing this letter and putting this other stuff in here, we gain anything at all. I don't think there's any notion of that we've protected stuff for a lawsuit we're never going to file. So the first paragraph, I'm sort of okay with it if we end it there, because I do think it raises a good point and people will think about it. It doesn't sound whiny if we end it, where I suggested.
Where did you suggest ending?
I suggested we basically go through that and say, although the SEC process does allow for adjustment of long-term growth projections on a periodic basis, it does not allow. The city encourages ABAG to work with HCD to reduce the 2010-2000 projections to reflect the adaptations already made by the Department of Finance to the changing state of California demographics. To me, that sounds like a good point that's not whiny. I don't think we want to say reduce, that reduces, regain public confidence. That's a direct attack on ABAG. I think that's unnecessary. And I would drop the second paragraph. I don't think we gain anything more by
The second paragraph meaning?
Where it starts with furthermore, current and future projections should be adjusted so they are more consistent with historical growth patterns. I think we've made our point. The whole second paragraph, I think, should just go. And the third paragraph, I think it's fine. I don't think it really adds that much either way. I don't think people are going to be too annoyed by it. But, I'd be fine if it went. I'd be sort of okay if it stayed.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
The introduction to these 3 points has a tone to it that could upset people. And I just wonder if you think about that as well. I mean, as soon as somebody says to me, your thoughts are flawed, I immediately kind of raise my hackles and want to fight. So.
Yeah.
So perhaps Curtis could speak to that, because it does reflect the language the committee had come up with last time. And
Well, it's always hard to tell how people are going to read these things or see them. I tend to agree, and I think our point last time, in fact, I think our point the first time when this came to the council was that we would like to focus it on the areas where we thought there was the best chance of getting some positive response, which is, again, the county numbers. But starting the language with the city, would like to why the arena methodology for the cyclist flood. That could, something like that could easily be rewritten to just say we'd like to, bring your attention to these other concerns that reiterate the concerns that the city has expressed previously, or something like that, without sounding like we're challenging necessarily.
I think we've always had the challenge amongst ourselves here is how are we emphatic in making our points and not being brusque. Councilmember Schmidt.
Different point of view. On packet page 10 is the appeal request. And this is something we have filled out, and it has 3 bullets marked. Failure to adequately consider unforeseen change in circumstances. What is not marked is market demand for housing. And it seems to me that we are raising an issue about market demand for housing. Why isn't that checked?
Well, I don't think the issue of the 77 units of the county versus the 350 of
That is true.
and all that is relative to the market demand for housing. So the market demand housing would have to be then related to the projections, which is not what the basis for the appeal is. I mean, that's not what we've included in here as the basis for the appeal.
Well, let me go to number 1. The base issue here is our appeal is us, the county, and Stanford. And we're sort of talking, barking at each other, with ABAG standing on the side saying, great, these guys can bark at each other, work it out. No one's barking at me, which means our process has been endorsed. Now, I thought the key point of number 1 is there are some valid issues about the process we have gone through over the last 2 years. And
When you say number 1, you mean the first box? This application?
no, I have
Page
gone
8.
back to the letter
Okay.
on page 8, and the number 1 on page 8 that you wanted to modify, I guess I also wanted to modify. But the basis of this is in the staff report, on page 4 of the staff report. It says, while ABAG has the ability to appeal HCD's projection, ABAG did not appeal. On page 3...
Anytime you all want to know what's going on, I'll be happy to do it. Sorry for interrupting, and I
So
don't know that everybody knows that I did the projections that you say were unreasonable.
we need to have you.
It's out of
We need-
process.
We need. Well,
I'm
that's okay.
trying to help.
We just need to have you do 2 things. One is fill out a speaker card.
What?
Need to have you do 2 things. One is fill out a speaker card, and then when you do speak, you'll be called to the microphone.
Yeah,
Do something informal. I'm happy to go to Miriam and tell them you're all crazy, but
Okay, we'll get to you soon.
let me finish. On page 3 of the staff report, it says, the regional forecast provided by HCD and mandated by ABAG was inconsistent with the Department of Finance population projections. Now, it seems to me we have raised that issue, And to go back to page 8, number 1, that is what is being done there. I think that should be made stronger so it's clearer what our issue is. And I would suggest the first 6 or 7 lines ending with Department of Finance, DOF, and everything after that be replaced with a simple couple sentences saying, in fact, it is inconsistent with state law that gives priority to the Department of Finance's demographic forecast. By not appealing HCD's allocation as asked for by at least one of its members, ABAG has failed to act as a representative of its member cities. Now, I think that puts number 1 in a stronger situation, and I think it goes back to the essence of the issue, is the forecast numbers as started by the Department of Finance have gotten lost in the process and procedure and ignored by ABAG. So I think it is our right and obligation to point out if we see an inconsistency with what has taken place. Because if we do not, the future of ABAG is, oh, you have accepted the base numbers that were done in summer of 2012, and we will live with those till 2040. So I think it's important as a city that we identify the issue and to state it in strong and simple terms.
Does staff want to add anything or respond to that? And then Commissioner Keller had his hand up.
No, again, the only thing I would add is that I don't think that all of that, whether you're on board with it or not, is a basis for the appeal. And so the question largely becomes, how relevant do we need to, or how much do we need to focus on that and time spent on it, because it's still not a basis for the appeal. ABAG's not going to see it as a basis for the appeal.
I guess that's why I started with the question, is there is an item in there saying market demand for housing. We have appealed their forecast, and they have denied our appeal and not pursued HCD.
I'm going back to the basic. I mean, it's not just anything about market demand for housing. It's going back to the two on the packet page 7, the 2 criteria for grounds for appeal, and I guess some way you can fit that in, but the committee's discussion last time was that was not the specifics, and that was not something that we really think ABAG is going to give any credence to, and that it diverts attention from the area that we might have a winnable argument on, to spend time arguing the projections.
You mentioned in the letter that one of our follow-up programs should be to talk to Senator Hill and Assembly member about issues we might have. Having a strong and clear statement what our disagreement is would be helpful at the political level for them to raise questions and issues about how the system is working.
I think that's the committee discussion item.
Sorry, Arthur.
Commissioner Keller.
So 2 things. Firstly, I would suggest, in terms of the ground for appeal number 1 that we're all agreed on, I would suggest adding a little bit more documentation. And in particular, if you look at the ABAG letter that was handed out on page 3, the first full paragraph,
Just a second. Hang on while we all get with you here. This is an at places document?
Yes. It's page 3. It's this one. It basically, and I think that's the document that actually made it to our handout also. It says, the result of the proactive attention to the details of Stanford City unincorporated areas, boundaries that staff has a high degree of confidence, blah, blah, blah. And then it talks about are appropriate on line 4 for Stanford University lands and unincorporated lands outside city spheres of influence. Okay, so they basically said that it only is appropriate for things outside the city sphere of influence. So they just essentially said everything we said doesn't apply. And then they say, note housing allocation for unincorporated areas within a city sphere of influence are assigned to the city in Santa Clara County. And we should cite that and basically attach a map showing the sphere of influence, which I assume includes Stanford University within the city's sphere of influence. Am I correct in the assumption that Stanford is within the city's sphere of influence?
It is within a sphere of influence, but we have a tri-party agreement that we will not annex anything on Stanford lands.
Exactly.
Without Stanford and the county's agreement. And that's the point we've made.
Exactly, and therefore I think we should cite the fact that they're explicitly assigning to Palo Alto Stanford's Stanford, because of their sphere of influence, we cannot annex it, and therefore it should be assigned to Stanford. And I think that strengthens our case to explicitly point out within their letter their policy, and that their statement that they don't assign it to Stanford and they'll assign it to the county because it's outside the sphere of influence is basically gobbledygook.
Can I clarify again what you're reading from?
County letter.
Because this is a county letter. This is not ABAG's letter.
There's a county letter.
This is a county staff report from staff to the Board of Supervisors.
Okay, sorry.
It was attached to the letter to ABAG from the county that objected to our initial bringing this issue up. And at that point, we weren't even asking for revisions. We were just noting that we were going to be working with the county.
Okay. Well, in any event, that's worthwhile pointing out, and to the extent that there's something from the county, and when you go back to the county, pointing that out to the county is certainly worthwhile telling them, because essentially they're saying, oh, they exclude stuff that's outside the city of influence, but it is in the city's influence. And so that's worthwhile. Secondly, in terms of the long term, it seems to me that Councilmember Schmid's point about bringing forward the correctness or incorrectness of the long-term projections is something that preserves our sort of long-term theme, and that's one thing. But that's I think a strategic matter. A tactical matter that's somewhere in between is the idea of trying to get the ABAG methodology to break out in the future how many units it assigns to the city that is in its sphere of influence outside the city. And I assume that any city that has land outside the city that's in the sphere of influence would like to know how many units are assigned there. And so in future ABAG RENA allocations, we should ask that the methodology break that number out. And if that number is broken out, then it's very easy in a future appeal to say, hey, that's not us, that's Stanford, assigned to the county. And that would avoid this problem because we'd know exactly how many units that was.
So also with us is Senior Assistant City Attorney Cara Silver. And do you have anything to add? And if you do, if you'd like to come to the table? I saw your head nodding, so. Either way. Yeah. Either way, come to the table over there.
Thank you. Cara Silver, Senior Assistant City Attorney. I think this is largely a strategic or tactical standpoint or point of view. And in terms of the grounds for appeal, the first one we do believe is the strongest, and I concur with the discussion about bolstering that point, and certainly the ability for the city to assert these other points are in the record overall. They don't necessarily, from a legal standpoint, need to be in the letter itself. They've been made in other staff reports. And so from a legal standpoint, I think we're comfortable that that record has been made.
And Councilmember Berman, you had another question, and then we'll go to the public.
I don't necessarily recall what it was.
Okay. Okay, we do have one member of the public, Stephen Levy.
This is not going to work if you're going to put a time limit on it.
You have to be at the microphone.
Okay? So this is not going to work if you put a time limit, so
This is
at your pleasure.
This is committee level, so we can be somewhat
Okay, so
informal.
I think most of you know that I do these regional projections for a living. I do them for 5 regional planning agencies in California, including ABAG. In addition to that, I negotiate with HCD for some of the regional planning agencies, so I know the staff at HCD. And I'm also a resident here. ABAG is a client, Miriam Chan is a friend and a client. I presented to 4 ABAG committees. I kind of know the general drift of how these appeal and how these issues are going. Okay. ABAG is very interested in you all working with Stanford or jurisdictions working with each other, and what Curtis said, and particularly if you've had discussions with the county recently, will have a very favorable reception at ABAG. They understand the broader issues of Stanford and its job growth and where does that housing go, and all of the jurisdictions is not a cut and dried thing, so they would love to see the jurisdictions around here working with Stanford. As you know, I think as your attorney and Curtis have both said, the point about build out could be said by, probably 80 of the 98 cities in the Bay Area, and that we are wonderful on greenhouse gas emissions. They would love us, but it's not anything that's a legal basis for appeal. Right. So now you're down, and Greg is a dear friend, now you're down to the point that I think Mark and maybe Greg raised, that you are both insulting my work, but you are insulting their work, and if you choose to put that in, calling the growth projections unreasonable and suggesting that they are in error, you ought to at least know a little more. You can judge whether that's stupid, which would be my vote, since you're going to win probably on the appeal. Why would you ever call somebody you're appealing stupid? But you need to understand that they know that both the population growth and the job growth in this region and in this county in particular, in the year and a half since we've done the projections, has raced far ahead of the projections. And so from ABAG's point of view, they are further ahead in population and job growth than they expected to be. They're not behind. If I give you a number, the plan calls for 33,000 jobs a year. The Bay Area is now averaging 90,000 jobs a year. The Bay Area has added 65,000 people a year in the last 2 years. That's consistent with the longer-term ABAG projection, but the DOF numbers say that Santa Clara County, which has added 20,000 in a recession year in 2010 and 20,000 in a recovery year in 2011, is going to add 7,500 people a year to the end of the decade. So if you rely on, which is nonsense, because we just added 30,000 jobs last year, we're going to add 30,000 jobs this year. You don't, not only won't you win, but I think Greg, as I've been trying to argue with Curtis, and Greg has a poor technical case. And if you want to do that, you ought to hear what's going to come back at you if you decide to insult all of the people. Now, the last point is they didn't appeal to HCD, Greg. They went, and this is completely off the record, they went, phew. HCD just gave us 200,000 fewer housing units than our own forecast said we would have. Why would they appeal? Okay? Because HCD was using numbers that were very, very low because they didn't take into account ABAG's numbers, which they're supposed to do and which they will do last time. And ABAG said, we aren't going to appeal because our cities are going to like that. Right. So the reason they didn't appeal is that numbers were lower. Finally, Greg, the DOF rules are written down that the HCD projections are supposed to be consistent with the DOF projections, which means they're supposed to be within 3% of the target. But that's not the way HCD is operating. That's the written law. But HCD, partly because just they're doing it that way, but partly because it conforms to the SCS, is saying that the regional housing numbers are consistent with the job numbers, something that's not in DOF. That's partly because they understand that that's correct now, and they've done that in 5 regions, but partly because that's the SCS, that the housing should be built in the same region, not necessarily in Palo Alto, but in the same region as the jobs. Whereas the DOF numbers, if you push them, you're going to run into the point that they have 500,000 people added in San Joaquin County, which is first of all insane, but second of all in direct conflict with state law around the SCS. So it's I think unfortunately that Greg is wrong. I think you'll find a very hostile audience, and you ought to know that the ABAG numbers now are running way ahead of what we projected a year and a half ago. That's just what's on the ground. You see that every place around the valley. Whereas your argument about Palo Alto and Stanford is in a broader context that you're going to find a very receptive audience if you have other partners here that understand, you know, maybe some more should go at Stanford.
Okay, thank you for that. And if there are questions from Mr. Levy, those are of course allowed. So if anybody has questions.
I have questions for Mr. Levy. If you want to stand up, I actually have some questions for you.
Sure.
I really appreciate your comments. I think they're very helpful. So how does this fit in? You said that the ABAG numbers are running ahead for Northern California. Is that
yes,
because it's a Northern California region? How are they doing in the rest of the state? Because my understanding, and maybe I'm just out of date, that the rest of the state is not really gaining population.
Right. So you have, yes.
So everyone, so the growth is all here, not the rest of the state.
Not all here, but we are the only region that is adding population now at a faster rate than we did in the previous decade. One of the technical flaws in the DOF projections is that, at least unless they've changed recently, they assumed that the migration would follow the pattern of 2000 to 2010 when we had the dot-com bust and the horrible thing. It was a technical mistake. But yes, we're the only region that's running ahead of growth trends in the mid-90s. And we are. I mean, we've added 65,000 people a year on the DOF estimates in the last 2 years. 20,000 each in the county that we live in, which is the relevant one. So, yeah.
Just briefly, so do you have in front of you the first paragraph of in number 1?
The one where you said we were all crazy?
Yeah.
I was crazy and DOF was crazy. Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure we're saying you're crazy.
Saying, you know, substantially overstate the growth.
Back to page 8.
Right? In
Number
fact,
1.
projected growth and its related impact on the primary driver, the regional forecast of growth in jobs for the regions, however, substantially overstates the growth. You have no evidence, but that's the statement you're talking about.
So you would say that statement is flat out wrong?
Flat out. It was wrong when Greg made it in 2011, although he had a much better case back then, but history has made it even more wrong because the Bay Area, particularly where we live, this peninsula from San Francisco down through San Jose, is just adding jobs like a maniac, and companies are building space. And if you want to argue that the housing should be built someplace else in San Jose, that's fine, but you can't deny that the job growth is just going bonkers here.
Can I just ask a sort of so my understanding is, as I said, is that in the state of California as a whole, population growth is flat or slightly declining.
Has slowed dramatically.
Might even be slightly declining. Am I wrong on that?
No. It's really technical. Department of Finance says we're growing by fewer than 300. Department of Finance says we're growing by fewer than 300,000 people a year now. Growing, but that's very slow. And that's the 300,000 they've essentially extended out for the 40-year period. We used to have 500,000 or 600, so we're slow. It's not negative. An additional problem is that the Census Bureau says we're growing by 400,000 people a year, not 300,000. So there's a census DOF thing, and that's even more technical. You don't want to get into that, but we're definitely slowed.
So where are the people coming to Northern California? Are they moving out from the Central Valley to Northern California? Are they moving from
it's
Southern
foreign
California?
immigrants. It's foreign immigrants.
So it's all foreign immigration.
Well, in terms of why we're extra growing, it's foreign immigration, and that we don't have large domestic outmigration. We don't have a lot of people leaving here like they used to go live in Tracy or some other place. So we're kind of zero there in foreign immigration. And if you want to think about it in the future, the next time that ABAG does a growth forecast, they're going to have to contend with an almost certainly doubled or tripled H-1B visa immigration, skilled immigration policy. And that's going to even increase it.
So final
Yes.
question. Do you have documentation that you can give to the committee that would be helpful to us that, can maybe give us some background on this stuff? Would that be a possibility?
Yeah, I mean, if it's going to get you to see, I'm just talking out of church here. You take that paragraph out, and I go to Miriam and I say, make a deal. These guys are serious. That stuff with Stanford is greatly mucked up, and it's mucked up more than just this 77 units, I think. They're open to that. If you're saying we're crazy, she's crazy, we're crazy, we're understating, we should go to HCD. So I can send you the job and population statistics for the recent year and how they compare to the long-term trend. I can write Curtis and you all a one-page memo.
I personally would think that would be helpful, at least to
On
me
that?
as a council member.
But I was just responding to what Mark and you said, that
Right.
the strategy of it seems off to me. I know her. I went to a meeting with everybody. There were people like Palo Alto, mainly from affluent cities in Marin, that raised this argument. Fortunately, you didn't in the public setting. And they all looked like, nobody challenged the regional number. They were all saying, not us, we can't do it, we're built out, do it someplace else. And they all looked everybody looked at them like, we should really do our policy for 5 rich cities in Marin County that don't want to take their fair share. But none of them even challenged the regional thing like you're doing. So I don't know. This is, yeah.
Well, thank you
Yes,
very
I'll
much
write
for
your
taking the
memo.
time today to come out and speak to us.
What?
Thank you very much for taking the time to come speak to us.
I'm trying to be a peace broker. You've got such a good point. When I saw Curtis's memo, and you had that one really good point that I know would resonate, I said, why do all this stuff that's not a basis? And then why tell them they're crazy? Now, it's me too, so I have some personality.
Not biased.
So, Curtis, do you have any thoughts or comments you'd like to share after a fair amount of information has been provided again?
I don't think so.
Well, Lacking that, Councilmember Schmidt does.
Yeah, just a quick response. I want to thank Steve for coming and sharing his viewpoint and ideas. And I don't think a good intellectual discussion is one where you're calling people crazy or mad or wild. So welcome the chance to discuss items. Starting, I guess, with the forecast for the state of California, Department of Finance has done both a short-term and a long-term forecast and has dramatically lowered their growth profile. Just within the last week, there's been update of numbers of census numbers on young people in California, and California is the third lowest state in the union in terms of its growth of young people. Our birth rates are down, and young people are migrating from the state. The Pew Charitable Trust has just come out with their update about immigration, both legal and illegal, into the United States and into California. And they reiterate that over the last 7 years, both legal and illegal immigration rates have fallen dramatically, and they are close to reaching a net zero in the last census year. California remains the state with the third highest unemployment rate, and to think that a solution to our problems are having another housing boom does not necessarily coincide with a healthy outlook for the state. So I think it is important that we do focus on basics, demographics, birth rate, what's happening to young people in the state as they look for jobs and opportunities and migrate out of the state, the declining share of young people in the state, and especially the trends on migration, both legal and illegal, into the state. This has affected the state as a whole, but I think you will find that Bay Area numbers are tracking what's going on in the rest of the state. Now, if we come up with numbers that are different, that's important, but the Department of Finance has taken responsibility to do a long-term forecast, and by law, they are the standard which should be used by other state agencies. And I think it would be good and healthy to have a discussion and debate about the Department of Finance's numbers.
Do I see Councilmember Berman's?
Yeah. I don't necessarily disagree with Councilmember Schmidt that it might be a good idea to have a discussion on the growth projections, and I think a lot of the points that he made that it seems that other folks agree with have to do with the state as a whole and not necessarily the Bay Area in particular. I want to win. And if we view winning as getting ABAG to allow us to transfer 350 units from Palo Alto to Stanford, then I want this letter to be as strong as possible in achieving that goal. I don't want an academic exercise that isn't going to move us further to our goal and in fact might harm that goal. And so I think that it makes sense to have these discussions. It makes sense to talk with Senator Hill and Assemblyman Gordon, on the state level to try to make some changes at that level. I don't think that this is the place to do that. I think this is the place for us to try to, identify what we're trying to do, which seems to be get 350 units off of our docket, and that's all. And so let's put ourselves in as strong a position as possible to do that. And I don't know, I didn't think so coming into this meeting. I definitely don't think so after listening to Steve Levy's comments, think that these points help us do that.
Yeah, I did. So I fully agree with Mark on this. And, I've always had concerns about, in the last meeting we had, I raised them, and I thought we should focus on the single appeal. And I still believe that. I think we should put our best foot forward. And therefore, I'll make a motion that staff deletes the entire section starting with "in addition to the reasoning above," and deletes all the way down through 3. And so we discuss,
Packet page A.
right. So it goes to, the city believes that should be adjusted accordingly, and then it says, once again, thank you for the opportunity to appeal adopted RENA methodology. And as part of that, I would also go ahead and instruct staff that they can clean up the first page to basically make it more friendly. They would need to take out the part that says the following appeal focuses on one of these items for appeal. That should be period. We would take out the sentence. And that's
To help us track, if you could identify where that is.
Yeah, so if you go to the middle of the page, at the bottom it says, "The City of Palo Alto request for revision letter outlines several reasons why the City of Palo Alto's housing allocation was overstated. The following appeal focuses on one of those items, ground for appeal." If we're going to take out the rest of that section, as my motion suggests, then you obviously would take out, however, the city's other concerns remain and are stated below for the record. I think I've caught it all there, but, let me just look. Yeah, maybe it should say the following outlines the criteria which the appeal is based. I think that's fine. Yeah, so that would be my motion, that we delete that sentence, that we delete the part where it says in addition all the way to the end of the page, and then we give staff some discretion to rewrite this if they think it's necessary with different language to focus on the one single ground for appeal that we have on this, and put our best foot forward on that.
I'll second.
Could I just ask if included in that very last part of what you said, we add some language along the lines of what Commissioner Keller was mentioning about the sphere of influence for Stanford and sort of interagency agreement we have, that because I think that is a point we didn't make strong enough in here, but we can
So I guess
strengthen
I would
it.
even give you more discretion in that in the motion. My discretion would be, go ahead and put your, as staff, we're sitting here and analyzing this in 15 minutes, and I appreciate Arthur's comments. I thought they were very good. I would give staff the discretion to go ahead and put our best foot forward on this, and if that includes rewriting this letter to put more information, to include Arthur's comments, if something else, comes up with you in that context, it should go ahead and put that, and then we present that to the council.
And I would look to the seconder to see if you're okay with that.
Yes. Can the seconder ask one clarifying question?
Sure.
That was just to confirm again with our attorney from the city attorney's office that it's not necessary for us legally to bring these appeals up again to down the road, mention that we appealed this and it's, these issues are concerns of ours. I might not have phrased that logically or not legibly, but.
Are you talking about the items, the 3 remaining
Correct.
items?
Yeah. It's all right to drop those. We don't need to continue
Right.
bringing them up to keep our ability to keep bringing them up.
Correct. Let me just clarify what our legal ability to challenge this is. It's a 2-step appellate process. It's only an administrative process. So ABAG is going to be the final adjudicator on this appeal. Courts have held that there is no judicial remedy once there is that allocation. So if we do decide to bring litigation, which Palo Alto has discussed in the past, it is there would be some problems there. It is a new statute, though. There might be some grounds, and so to the extent you want to raise those other arguments in the litigation, I think they are preserved given this current record that we have.
Thanks. Then, yeah, I'm good.
Okay, Councilmember, Mayor Sharp, would you care to speak to your motion?
Yeah, I think that, as Councilmember Berman eloquently said, we should win this appeal. And that should be the focus of it. That's what we should get done. I realize that there are a bunch of issues that Councilmember Schmidt has raised and that Stephen Levy has talked about. And I don't think we have the time or the ability to go into the merits of each of them at this meeting. And I don't think it's necessary. I think we may very well decide later to send another letter pointing up those issues if we think that's the right thing to do as a committee. I don't think that needs to be included in the appeal. And I, for one, actually would like to have almost a study session with Mr. Levy, if he'd agree to it, and come where we talk all these issues through, where we have a long discussion about it, where he presents some data, we have an advance, we talk about it, I think that would be a good intellectual exercise, and it would be worthwhile for the public and worthwhile for the council. And I see us losing nothing by taking these issues out, and I am concerned, as Mr. Levy pointed out and Councilmember Berman pointed out, that we only hurt ourselves by doing this. And at the end of the day, we want to be effective. And I think this allows us to be more effective with losing nothing and preserves the abilities to address some of the concerns that Councilmember Schmidt raised. And I think that we should therefore do this and go ahead and hope to prevail on this.
Councilmember Berman, would you care to speak to your second?
Just quickly, I want to reiterate or iterate for the first time that I'm not, two very smart people that I respect have very different viewpoints on some of these issues. And I'm not coming down on one way or the other on those because I haven't done the necessary research to do that. I'm just asking or trying to determine what's the goal of this letter and then what's the best way to attain that goal. And the goal, and I've already said, the goal seems to be to move 350 units off of Palo Alto's allocation, and the only grounds for appeal that we have to do that has to do with the Stanford County Palo Alto discussion. So I think it's a good idea to really focus on that and not dilute that message at all with any other disagreements that we have. With ABAG, we can do that. There will be plenty of opportunity, I'm sure, for us to do that. But I don't know that this is the best venue for that.
Councilmember Schmidt?
I will vote against the motion. I think the goal is to have a good working relationship with ABAG. And I think that is best done where cards are on the table. And I think we have to acknowledge that in the decade between 2000 and 2010, ABAG overestimated the growth in the Bay Area counties by 45%. They overestimated the growth in the 3 West Bay counties by something like 38%. And their current long-term forecasts on which they're basing the allocations are between 40 and 45% higher than the long-term forecast from the Department of Finance over the 30-year period. Now, those are important issues, and I think trying to mollify ABAG by saying, oh, it's okay, those really aren't important, is not good city policy, not good city strategy, and I agree with Mayor Scharf that it would be appropriate to sit down and have a discussion around the numbers. I think that would be healthy. But also, I feel badly about losing an opportunity to tell ABAG this is an issue for us.
So I'm prone to support the motion, but I do have one friendly amendment.
Sure.
If the maker and seconder would accept it. So on packet page 7, under the numerals 1 and 2, the City of Palo Alto's request for a revision letter outlines several reasons why the City of Palo Alto's housing allocation was overstated. The maker of the motion had suggested deleting that next sentence. The following appeal focuses on one of these items, grounds for appeal. However, the city's other concerns remain and are stated below for the record. I would suggest that we keep that sentence in, but delete everything after it remains. So it would be, however, the city's other concerns remain. Period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay. All right. And before we vote, I'd like to see if a board member or commissioner have comments or thoughts to add. Commissioner Keller.
I was actually going to suggest the same change that you had there with a slightly different wording, and I'm not sure that, which is, however, the city's other concerns remain and are already in the record. I'm not sure if that's necessary or not, but that's what I was going to suggest. That's fine. But I was agreeing exactly with your suggestion there, and I think that indicates the continuance of that. And I think I'm not a lawyer, but those of you who are lawyers might assume that can tell us whether that would preserve our claims for the record.
Board members Caswell or Mitchell?
I do think. Here, I should take this. I do think something beneficial happens when you have fresh eyes look at something. And so I think having Councilmember Berman come to this discussion, it's not as if this discussion didn't happen before. What's the best way to approach this? Do we add in things that are not appropriate for the appeal because we feel strongly about that? I mean, this was discussed at the last meeting. It's really critical that this committee agrees on what the goal is so that what you're doing actually meets the goal. And I actually just heard two different goals. The goal that Councilmember Berman brought up that I saw nods to, but you haven't voted. And then the goal that Councilmember Schmidt brought up was a different goal. So I encourage you to make sure that you put on the record what your goal is so that the letter supports that goal.
Board Member Mitchell, do you have thoughts or comments?
Briefly, as a citizen of Palo Alto, I think we're clearly in good hands with the thinking that you have all discussed today and presented. It sounds like there's broad agreement on the big issues, and you're really discussing tactical differences in terms of breaking that goal up into smaller pieces, perhaps. As a school board member, I think you all recognize that the 350 units won't make any difference whether they're in Stanford or the county, but we certainly support your reasoning and efforts and appreciate your work with Stanford to make it as jointly appealing as possible.
Commissioner Keller?
Actually, it does make a slight bit of difference whether they're in the city or their county, because if they're in the city, we get them in the city and in the county, and if they're only in the county, then the city produces less, is obligated to produce less, and therefore they're not. We don't double count. So that actually does make a difference, and I think that the next time the RENA allocation comes again, probably. Possibly with the exception of new Councilmember Berman, but probably the entire council will be replaced. And therefore, it might be helpful at the end of this cycle to create some sort of living document that captures the history of what happened and sort of reminds us of all the arguments in our strategy that we want to follow. So that when this comes up again, and hopefully we'll have the same, hopefully we'll have the same staff. But I'm not sure how long. I'm not sure how long. Maybe Curtis will get promoted or something. But
we're having an ad hoc reorganization meeting here, I think.
But the interesting thing is capture this down, write this down, capture it, and so that 8 years from now you'll be able to come back to it, or 6 years from now you'll be able to come back to it and revisit that again, and know that you're not starting from scratch.
I'm not seeing any final comments. That
promises to stick around for 10 years.
So you all will correct me if I haven't captured all this, but I think it's important to repeat the motion. So the motion is not that. On packet page 8, to delete everything after, including and after, in addition to the reasoning above. So everything on the rest of that page deletes. And the letter picks up again on the next page with, once again, thank you for. On the prior page, under the section that starts, as noted in your letter, the sentence after number 2 retains all of the language in that paragraph except that last sentence, however, the city's other concerns remain, period, and the language after that is deleted. In addition to that, staff was given latitude to clarify or amend language that might change a bit the complexion of the letter to be a little bit more, a little bit less hard-hitting, and also to include reference to sphere of influence. And have I captured everything in the motion?
Yes.
Okay.
And frankly, just if they wanted to add something, if they come up with other arguments that are in our favor, they could add those.
Okay. So if there are other arguments in our favor, that we would add those. Councilmember Schmidt.
Yeah, Mayor Scharf made a suggestion for a future agenda.
Let's do that as a second motion, if that's all right.
I think so.
Yes, agreed.
Be over here.
So, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And opposed? That's a 3-1 vote with Councilmember Schmidt voting no.
It'll still be on consent.
It's a-
Thing I can do.
Yeah. So we can have this discussion again. So, future,
So,
I'm sorry, who, Mr. Levy?
Would you instruct Curtis that he can talk with me? I'm going to see Miriam on Tuesday, and I can do a little off-the-record stuff if I know exactly some more details about the conversations you've had with the county in Stanford. So I'm asking that you give
So-
Curtis permission to.
I think that's just totally verboten. No, I'm just being silly. I think it would be actually prudent to have that conversation.
so I just
Mayor
have
Sharp?
a question. I assume staff always has that latitude, and so I'm actually a little uncomfortable instructing staff to talk or not
I don't
talk,
think you
because
need
I
to.
assume he can talk to you any day of the week. You know?
didn't want to go behind the committee's.
Right, no, I appreciate that.
I respect the council's direction, but I don't have to have it to say anything to anybody.
And then,
So we have voted on that, and our next item agenda is future meetings
so before we do
and
that,
agendas.
okay, I guess that might fall into that then.
And yes, so I think this is where we can discuss what was prior, what was a prior mention. Mayor Sharp.
So, if Mr. Levy is, amenable to it.
Anytime, any place.
So I would then like to ask staff to come back to the committee after consulting with Mr. Levy so that we could have a long discussion about these issues. Councilmember Schmidt, any thoughts about how you'd phrase what? I think we know what issues we mean, but if you want to add anything to that.
No, I think we've had a good introduction today.
All right. And we'll look forward to it.
So that will come back more or less as a more or less a study session, correct? Yeah.
Sure.
And I do apologize. And our next meeting is scheduled for Valentine's Day, if I noticed correctly. And is that meeting holding, and when would you see us having this meeting, or what else is on that agenda?
I believe that we could probably skip that meeting. I think the next real item of import for you is going to be when we get comments back from HCD on the housing element, to review those before the draft goes back to the commission and council for adoption. We just sent those today. We sent our comments reflecting the various changes based on what we presented to you 6 weeks ago or whenever it was. And we expect it'll take them 30 days at least to review that and get us a final thing. But we do have fingers crossed. We do think that probably will be saying okay to those changes, and then we'll bring them back to you. So it probably would be either the regularly scheduled meeting in March, or if we get them sooner than that, maybe something in late February we'd schedule separately. But that's what the schedule is looking like at this point in time. And then I think maybe when we get done with that, we can schedule the meeting with Steve, and maybe Dina can come as well. Or
So you wouldn't see those being the same meeting then? It depends on what the response is, I guess.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think we need to be sure we have time to get through that, and I don't want to have you end up cutting off the discussion, which will be robust, I'm sure.
Okay. Mayor Sharp.
So I would be fine if we had the meeting on the 14th, if that worked for Mr. Levy and other people to do that meeting. If that's too soon for you, that's fine. But if it was a possibility, and it doesn't even have to be on the 14th, but if we had a February meeting, so we don't not have a February meeting, I don't care what day we really have it on, if it's the 14th or not. But I actually would prefer if we did that sooner, so we don't forget what we talked about here, and then, do it 3 months later. So if it is possible to do that meeting in February, I don't know how busy everyone is, and obviously need to work it out, but I, for one, would prefer it if we do it sooner than later.
I thought the mayor forbid meetings.
Only in the evening. Remember, only in the evening.
Not an all-day holiday.
But if you also recall, I didn't get much support for that.
And I may not be in town for that one, actually. So, but a later date in February, perhaps.
We would. So we will see when we can get that together and check with all of you on your schedules, and we'll make sure it's a date that all four of you can
That's great.
be there.
Okay, very good. Anything else council members would care to bring up, or board and commission members? All right. Well, given that, meeting is adjourned, and thank you all.
Thank you.